Santiago de Compostela, September 2013. In the Galician capital, the region of Galicia, Spain, enveloped in the damp, medieval mist that often hides secrets, resided one of the most visibly and seemingly most successful families of the Compostela high society, the Basterra Portos. Their life was a perfect photograph framed by respectability and economic prosperity. The patriarch, Alfonso Basterra Camporro, a Basque journalist from the Basque country northern Spain, with a sharp wit and intellectual demeanor, had stepped away from the media spotlight to dedicate himself to criticism and translation, enjoying a comfortable retreat in the family apartment on the Central República del Salvador Street. Beside him, Rosario Porto Ortega, or Charo as she was known in her circle, was the personification of old money, abolengo. The only child of a lineage of jurists and consuls, she was a lawyer by profession, an elegant, sophisticated woman who had inherited a considerable estate, including the family mansion in Teo, outside Santiago, an enclave of tradition and privacy. Together they formed a stable, though perhaps overly conventional couple cemented by the customs and expectations of their class. The heart of this microcosm was their daughter, Asunta Fang, a girl adopted from China in 2001 when she was barely 9 months old. Asunta was not just the apple of their eye, she was the center of their universe. The education she received was strict and ambitious: piano lessons, violin, French, English, ballet. A precocious prodigy, the pride of her parents, who at 12 stood out for her intelligence, maturity, and artistic talent. The public image was immaculate, a happy family that had successfully combined professional success with absolute parental devotion. However, the cracks in this facade had been visible for months. In early 2013, the couple had separated. A breakup they tried to handle discreetly, but which did not go unnoticed in Santiago's small circle. Rosario, who had started a relationship with another man, and Alfonso, who had moved to another apartment on the same street, maintained a strange and symbiotic relationship after the separation. Their lives did not detach, rather they restructured around their daughter. They shared meals, walks, and intense phone exchanges, maintaining a closeness that baffled those who knew them. Rosario and her new partner soon broke up, and the lawyer returned to Alfonso's sphere, a physical return that was not a reconciliation as a couple but a return to an ecosystem of mutual dependence. In this atmosphere of precarious stability, Asunta's health had begun to deteriorate in the summer of 2013. In late June, Asunta suffered an episode of dizziness and nausea attributed to an alleged allergy or gastroenteritis. Days later, on July 5, while at her father's home, the girl fainted and had difficulty breathing, an incident that led Alfonso to claim an unknown person had tried to strangle her in the street. These incidents, to which the parents gave no major medical importance at the time, would later be classified as the first symptoms of a gradual poisoning. On September 21, 2013, a Saturday afternoon, this world of appearances collapsed in the most abrupt and dramatic way. The chronology of that day, according to the parents' initial testimonies, was simple. Alfonso Basterra claimed to have spent the morning with Asunta. They ate lunch together at his apartment and, according to his version, Asunta stayed home studying until 6 p.m. He said goodbye to her and remained home. Rosario Porto, for her part, said she picked up her daughter around 6 then to take her to the family country house in Teo, where Asunta was supposedly going to spend the afternoon studying, returning to Santiago later. Rosario declared that she had dropped Asunta off at the Teo house, realized she did not have her purse with her, drove back to Santiago to refit, and then returned to Teo finding the door open and the girl missing. At 10:30 de noche, Rosario and Alfonso appeared together at the National Police Station, Comisaría de Policía Nacional, in Santiago to report the disappearance. Their demeanor before the officers was strange from the start. There was no hysteria or desperation, but a coldness and composure that unnerved the police, who were accustomed to the urgent pain of loss. Alfonso was hyper-rational, detailed in his descriptions, Rosario more distant, trying to paint a portrait of her daughter that could justify a voluntary runaway. The search machine was immediately activated, although the crucial first hours were lost in the narrative of a possible flight. However, fate had already delivered its verdict. At 1:00 in September 2012, 2 men returning home in a remote, wooded area of the municipality of Teo, near the Cacheiras forest path, made a macabre discovery. Among the undergrowth beside a solitary road was the lifeless body of a girl. The corpse was still, with no visible signs of violence to explain the death, but the scene spoke of a furtive abandonment of someone who had wanted to dispose of the body in the dark. The corpse was Asunta Basterra. The news of the discovery immediately shifted the investigation. What had begun as a missing person file instantly turned into a case of homicide or murder. The Guardia Civil, Spain's national police force, similar to the FBI in its investigative capacity for rural and complex crimes, took the lead, and the focus immediately centered on the victim's closest circle, the parents. The couples returned to the police station to identify the body occurred under the watchful eye of the investigators. Rosario's reaction upon being informed of the tragic news was a burst of tears that some found genuine and others excessive and theatrical. Alfonso's was the same, cold, analytical, as if he were analyzing the situation as an external observer. The first crack in their alibi soon appeared. Rosario, when interviewed by Guardia Civil agents, fell into a crucial contradiction about her car's movement that day. Initially, she had denied going to Teo before 7 de noche. However, investigators had recordings from a security camera at a gas station showing her Mercedes, with Asunta in the passenger seat, at 6:18 heading toward the country house. When confronted with the irrefutable evidence, Rosario was forced to change her version. She admitted that yes, she had gone to Teo with Asunta, but only to drop her off there, and had then immediately returned to Santiago. Minutes later in the same interrogation she changed it again. Maybe I went back to Teo because I realized I didn't have my radio, or my purse. Investigators knew this dance of versions was not a sign of confusion from grief, but a desperate attempt to hide the truth. The Teo house was the geographical nexus between Asunta's departure and the discovery of her body. If the girl was in her mother's car heading to Teo at that time, her death and subsequent transfer must have occurred between then and 10 de noche, when the parents reported her missing. But where did Alfonso fit in this story? He maintained an ironclad alibi. He had eaten lunch with Asunta, watched her study until 6 p.m. and then stayed home. The Central Operational Unit, UCO of the Guardia Civil, focused on shattering this version and soon found elements linking him directly to the poison. The analysis of Asunta's medical records intersected with teacher testimonies. Weeks earlier, in July 2013, Asunta had missed music classes, claiming severe dizziness and drowsiness. Her music teacher testified that the girl had told her father was giving her some white powders that made her feel very sick, symptoms that perfectly matched the side effects of Lorazepam. The prosecution established that if the symptoms of sedation matched the administration of a substance by Alfonso months earlier, he had knowledge of an access to the medication. The puzzle of co-authorship began to take shape. The mother transported the victim to the crime scene, the Teo house. The father was the one allegedly administering the sedative, setting the stage. On September 24, Rosario Porto was formally arrested, charged with homicide. Days later the net closed around Alfonso Basterra, who was arrested on the same charge. In the investigators' minds, the motive was unclear, but the modus operandi was a plan orchestrated by both to eliminate their daughter, a plan that had failed at one point, the cleanup of their own home. The inspection of the Teo house, the presumed scene of the asphyxiation, was crucial. The Guardia Civil found an orange-colored rope identical to the fragments of rope found near Asunta's body. Although not the exact rope used to tie her, the similarity was so high that it directly linked the parents' property to the mechanism of the crime. Furthermore, agents seized the couple's computers and phones. Initial searches revealed disturbing data about Alfonso Basterra. His lifestyle habits were meticulous, bordering on obsessive, and his internet searches in the months leading up to the crime linked him irrefutably to the substance that killed his daughter. Asunta's tragedy was no longer a mystery but a consummated betrayal. The parents, from their separate cells, began a game of crossed lies that would define the trial, but the forensic and technological evidence had already sealed their fate. Asunta's body, abandoned in the darkness of a rural road, had become the most powerful silent witness to the coldness of her executioners. The next step of the investigation was to delve into the minds of the killers through science, confirming that Asunta's death was not an impulsive act but the end of a macabre found on the Cacheiras forest path in the municipality of Teo Arun on September 22, 2003, was the trigger that exposed the hidden truth of the Porto Basterra family. The scene of the discovery was desolate, and to the experts of the Guardia Civil offered the first crucial clues about the nature of the crime and the identity of its perpetrators. Asunta lay in a position of abandonment with no signs of struggle or sexual violence. Her body, dressed in a white t-shirt and gray pants, was unusually clean, immediately ruling out a kidnapping followed by a struggle in a rural setting. The preliminary autopsy would reveal that the girl had died from asphyxiation, likely by suffocation or strangulation. Additionally, she had minor injuries on her wrists, suggesting she had been restrained, maniatada. However, the most disconcerting and decisive element for the investigation would be revealed hours later, at the Santiago Institute of Legal Medicine. The toxicological analysis of Asunta's body carried out by forensic experts yielded a chilling result. The girl had not died naturally or from an accidental asphyxiation. Her system contained a massive lethal amount of the active ingredient Lorazepam, a potent anxiolytic and sedative of the benzodiazepine family, sold under brand names like Orfidal. The detected dose was so high it was enough to incapacitate an adult and proved she had been drugged before being suffocated. The death had been premeditated, cold and above all silenced. While the forensic experts established the cause of death, the Central Operational Unit (UCO) of the Guardia Civil focused on unraveling the chronology of Asunta's final hours and crucially the behavior of her parents. The UCO knew that in most child crimes, the inner circle is the main suspect, and Rosario and Alfonso's lies in their initial statements only confirmed this hypothesis. The keystone that brought down the parents' initial alibi was the security camera footage from a gas station on the outskirts of Santiago. Rosario Porto had declared that, after separating from Alfonso, she drove alone to the Teo house, arriving there only after 7 p.m. She insisted she had left Asunta at the Santiago apartment around 6 p.m. to study. The footage taken at 6:18 p.m. clearly showed Rosario driving her Mercedes on the A54 highway, and most importantly, Asunta Basterra was in the passenger seat. Confronted with this irrefutable evidence, Rosario was forced to modify her story. She said yes, she had gone to Teo with Asunta, but only to drop her off there and had then immediately returned to Santiago. Minutes later in the same interrogation she changed it again. Perhaps I went back to Teo because I realized I didn't have my radio, or my purse. Investigators knew this back and forth of versions was not a sign of confusion from grief, but a desperate attempt to conceal the truth. The Teo house was the geographical link between Asunta's departure and the discovery of her body. If the girl was in her mother's car heading to Teo at that time, her death and subsequent transfer must have occurred between then and the 7 noche, the time the parents reported her missing. But where did Alfonso fit into this narrative? He maintained an ironclad alibi. He had eaten lunch with Asunta, watched her study until 6 p.m. and then stayed home. The UCO focused on disrupting this version and quickly found elements linking him directly to the poison. The analysis of Asunta's medical records intersected with teacher testimonies. Weeks earlier, in July 2013, Asunta had missed music classes, claiming severe dizziness and drowsiness. Her music teacher testified that the girl had told her father was giving her some white powders that made her feel very sick, symptoms that perfectly matched the side effects of Lorazepam. The prosecution established that if the symptoms of sedation matched the administration of a substance by Alfonso months earlier, he had knowledge of an access to the medication. The puzzle of co-authorship began to take shape. The mother transported the victim to the crime scene, the Teo house. The father was the one allegedly administering the sedative, setting the stage. On September 24, Rosario Porto was formally arrested, charged with homicide. Days later the net closed around Alfonso Basterra, who was arrested on the same charge. In the investigators' minds, the motive was unclear, but the modus operandi was a plan orchestrated by both to eliminate their daughter, a plan that had failed at one point, the cleanliness of their own home. The inspection of the Teo house, the presumed scene of the asphyxiation, was crucial. The Guardia Civil found an orange-colored rope identical to the fragments of rope found near Asunta's body. Although not the exact rope used to tie her, the similarity was so high that it directly linked the parents' property to the mechanism of the crime. Furthermore, agents seized the couple's computers and phones. Initial searches revealed disturbing data about Alfonso Basterra. His lifestyle habits were meticulous, bordering on obsessive, and his internet searches in the months leading up to the crime linked him irrefutably to the substance that killed his daughter. Asunta's tragedy was no longer a mystery but a consummated betrayal. The parents, from their separate cells, began a game of crossed lies that would define the trial, but the forensic and technological evidence had already sealed their fate. Asunta's body, abandoned in the darkness of a rural road, had become the most powerful silent witness to the coldness of her executioners. The next step of the investigation was to delve into the minds of the killers through science, confirming that Asunta's death was not an impulsive act but the arrived at the Institute of Legal Medicine in Santiago de Compostela. the investigation shifted from a police search to a scientific dissection. Forensic experts and toxicologists took center stage, and their work in the laboratory would become the most irrefutable and devastating testimony for the prosecution. If Asunta's parents had tried to silence the truth, the girl's body chemistry would make sure it was shouted. The toxicological analysis of Asunta's body yielded a result that banished any possibility of accidental or natural death. In the blood tissues and crucially in the gastric contents, a massive concentration of the active ingredient Lorazepam was detected. Experts confirmed that the girl had ingested a lethal dose of this potent sedative, sold under the trade name Orfidal. The amount was so high it was enough to put an adult into a state of total stupor and helplessness, and in the body of a 12-year-old girl, it guaranteed absolute incapacitation. This revelation not only proved Asunta had been drugged, but that she was subdued to facilitate the final act of asphyxiation without meeting resistance. But the most chilling discovery by the toxicologists was the chronology of the poisoning. Using the technique of hair analysis, which allows tracking the ingestion of substances over time, experts discovered that Lorazepam had not only been administered on the day of her death. Asunta's hair contained traces of the sedative in significant concentrations in different segments, indicating a gradual and constant administration of the drug during the summer months of 2013. Forensic science had just converted Asunta's vague health symptoms into proof of a criminal plan. The dizziness, excessive drowsiness and fainting spells that her parents had attributed to an alleged allergy or school fatigue, and that had led Asunta to confess to her music teacher that her father was giving her white powders that made her feel ill, were in reality, the effects of continuous poisoning. The fainting spell Asunta suffered on July 5, right after lunch at Alfonso's house, was not a random occurrence, but an event of extreme sedation that, according to the prosecution, marked a failed and premature attempt to end her life. This chemical chronology established the element of premeditation in the crime. The killers did not act on impulse. They had been preparing the victim for months, undermining her ability to defend herself and her will, until she was ready for the final act. Lorazepam thus became the key evidence that dismantled the parents' defense. The next step was to connect the poison with its provider. Although Rosario Porto had a prescription for Lorazepam for herself, the massive purchases that allowed the lethal dose to be accumulated did not come from her usual pharmacy. It was the work of the Guardia Civil on Alfonso Basterra's devices that closed the loop. Forensic computer analysts tracked Alfonso's personal computer and found the digital trail of online purchases of Lorazepam, made in industrial quantities and under different generic names, all carried out months before the murder. This digital evidence proved that Alfonso, who denied consuming the drug, not only had access to the lethal substance but had deliberately accumulated it. The marriage of toxicology and technology proved lethal for the accused. The chemical evidence confirmed the what and the when of the poisoning continuous and lethal. The digital evidence confirmed the who supplied it Alfonso, and consequently the how it was planned. For the prosecution the conclusion was clear. The crime was a coordinated act. Alfonso Basterra supplied the silent weapon and administered it for months. Rosario Porto, the mother, was responsible for transporting the girl, already sedated by a final dose, to the Teo house, the place where the final act of asphyxiation was carried out. The coldness of the poison added to the parents' lies about the day of the crime, was the evidence that left no room for doubt. Lorazepam had not only ended Asunta's life, it had become the silent witness that, from the laboratory point toxicologists deciphered the way Asunta Basterra died. It was the analyst from the Guardia Civil Central Operational Unit who traced the path that led to the crime, turning the parents' electronic devices into the most reliable witnesses to their betrayal. In the age of hyperconnectivity, spoken lies crash against the cold memory of data, and in the Basterra Porto case, technology became the invisible handcuffs that sealed their fate. Alfonso Basterra's alibi was based on inaction. He had stayed home reading or studying without leaving his apartment on República del Salvador Street. The analysis of his cell phone and crucially his personal computer proved this stillness was a sham. Activity logs and cell phone towers proved that Alfonso moved that Saturday, dismantling his claim of non-involvement in the crime. But beyond geolocation, the real danger for Alfonso lay in his digital obsession. Alfonso, a methodical and precise man, left an impeccable digital trail of his planning. Investigators managed to access his browsing history and purchase transactions. There they found the irrefutable evidence that linked his activity to the forensic evidence, the repeated and organized purchases of Lorazepam online. Months before Asunta died, Alfonso had acquired large quantities of the sedative that toxicology identified in the girl's hair and body. These purchases, made under generic names to avoid arousing suspicion, demonstrated an accumulation of poison with a clear purpose. The defense could no longer claim the pills were for Rosario, as the quantities and purchase pattern pointed to a deliberate supply, confirming premeditation. The digital trail, however, was not limited to drug purchases. Analysts faced the task of recovering digital material that the parents, especially Alfonso, had meticulously tried to delete. The recovery of deleted files from their devices revealed images and communications that exposed the darkness of the family relationship. Among the most disturbing findings, photographs of Asunta taken by her father during the period she was already being sedated were recovered, in which the girl appeared visibly drowsy, drugged, and showing symptoms of extreme sedation. These images, deleted from the hard drive, became a chilling visual diary of the gradual poisoning. They were not photos of a father caring for a sick child, but a graphic documentation of an abuser incapacitating his victim. Proof of the planning was reinforced by the analysis of text messages and messaging applications. Although the couple had deleted many conversations, the Guardia Civil managed to recover exchanges that, while not explicitly detailing the crime, did confirm the coordination between Alfonso and Rosario in the days leading up to Asunta's death. They communicated about their movements, about the girl's presence in Teo, and about matters that the prosecution interpreted as final adjustments to the logistics of the murder. The phone trail proved that the couple's separation was, in operational terms, a facade. Their lives remained dangerously intertwined, with Asunta as the focal point of a symbiotic relationship that had degenerated into a criminal pact. The technological icing on the cake was served with the analysis of security videos. The gas station camera that captured Rosario and Asunta heading to Teo was just one piece. Investigators tracked other cameras along the route, confirming Rosario's arrival time at the country house, definitively invalidating her multiple versions. The objectivity of the video, and the cold antenna data stripped Rosario of her role as a clever lawyer. Every alibi she tried to construct was destroyed by her own car and her own digital footprint. For the jury, the digital evidence was crucial. It showed that Alfonso Basterra, the intellectual of the couple, not only supplied the silent weapon but documented his daughter's suffering. And that Rosario Porto, the heiress and lawyer, was not a mother overwhelmed by grief, but an actress who failed to adjust her script to the reality recorded by the cameras and internet servers. The digital trail not only incriminated the parents but also demonstrated that, in the struggle between human lies and technological truth, and computer forensics had shattered the alibi of Asunta Basterra's parents. The investigation's focus shifted to the psychological battleground, the interrogations. Confined in separate cells, Rosario Porto and Alfonso Basterra attempted, individually and jointly, to build a wall of lies to shield themselves from the undeniable truth. But without a coordinated version and under the pressure of the evidence, that wall cracked, revealing an appalling cynicism and coldness. The key to the couple's strategy was inconsistency. From the beginning, their statements to the Guardia Civil were a dance of versions. Rosario, the first to be arrested, was the quickest to fall into contradictions. Her story about the day of the crime was modified up to 3 times, first denying having gone to Teo with Asunta, then admitting the trip but claiming to have left her in Santiago, and finally changing the times and reasons for her return. Each change was a desperate attempt to bat the truth captured by the gas station security camera, revealing that the stretch between Santiago and Teo, with Asunta sedated on board, was the heart of their secret. Investigators noted that her distress seemed selective, not for the girl but for the state of her own narrative. Alfonso Basterra, for his part, maintained the most rigid and therefore the most easily refutable version, that of absolute stillness. He claimed to have been home from 6:30 until the report at 10:30 de la noche. Under pressure, his reaction was not panic but hyper-rationalization. His refusal to consume Lorazepam and his insistence on an immutable routine contrasted with the evidence from his computer, which showed drug purchases and the deleted files of photos of a drugged Asunta. His coldness regarding questions about Asunta's health and his utter lack of interest in the investigation painted him as the intellectual, dispassionate mastermind of the crime. The crucial moment came when the pressure of the arrest began to separate their strategies. Forced isolation, incomunicación forzada, made it impossible for the couple to coordinate a final version. Investigators, with the Lorazepam proof and geolocation in hand, confronted Rosario and Alfonso separately, forcing them to react to the evidence in real time. In the recorded interrogations, the lack of remorse was palpable. Rosario appeared more emotional, using tears to try to create empathy with the agents, but her crying was inconsistent with her prior and subsequent behavior. In an iconic and chilling moment, while being transferred by the Guardia Civil, Rosario asked one of the agents, "Are you going to handcuff me?" Her main concern remained image and appearance, not her daughter's life. Alfonso, conversely, opted for intellectual disdain. His attitude was that of someone who believed he was smarter than his interrogators, but his arrogance prevented him from seeing the weight of the scientific evidence. His refusal to offer a logical explanation for the irrefutable purchases or the orange rope from the Teo house, identical to the fragment found near the body, cemented the police's conviction that he was not a desperate man but a meticulous planner. The wall of lies collapsed with the evidence of co-authorship. Although both refused to directly incriminate each other for the asphyxiation, their individual lies about their movements and Asunta's sedation confirmed they had acted together. The prosecution argued that their refusal to admit who dealt the final blow was proof of their pact, a calculated silence to avoid confession and benefit from doubt. Their opposing versions, instead of generating reasonable doubt at trial, served to reinforce the idea that both were intimately familiar with all the crime's details. The investigators' conclusion was brutal. Alfonso Basterra's motive, though never fully explained, seemed tied to an obsession with controlling Rosario, using Asunta as a point of emotional leverage or a logistical obstacle in a life he wanted to reorder. Rosario Porto's motive, meanwhile, focused on liberation. The girl, her extracurricular classes, and her ambitious education had become a burden, a limitation on her desire to resume a life of personal freedom after their separation. The interrogations revealed two individuals who, beneath the facade of exemplary parents, had become cold conspirators. They had tried to play with the law and the truth, but their own words and devices turned against them. The preliminary investigation closed with a certainty. Rosario and Alfonso, in an act of inconceivable betrayal, had planned, sedated, and suffocated Asunta Basterra. The next stage would be the trial, where these lies would have to face uncovered the macabre chemical and the hero trail. The Asunta Basterra case reached its media and judicial climax. On September 29, 2015, 2 years after the crime, the oral hearing began at the Audiencia Provincial de A Coruña, the provincial court, a trial with a popular jury that captured the attention of all Spain. The challenge was monumental, to convince 9 citizens that two parents, with an image of respectability, were guilty of murdering their own daughter. Seated in the dock were Rosario Porto and Alfonso Basterra, maintaining a physical and emotional distance but united by the accusation of co-authorship. The courtroom became a stage of constant tension, where the cynicism of the accused clashed with the coldness of the scientific evidence. The strategy of the prosecution and the private prosecution, representing Rosario's maternal family, was based on the concept of circumstantial evidence. Since there was no direct witness to the murder, the prosecution had to interweave the data to form an unbreakable chain of guilt. The pillars of their argument were threefold: the poison, the collapse alibi, and the motive. The testimony of the toxicologists and forensic experts was the most impactful. They presented the Lorazepam report, confirming not only the lethal dose on the day of the crime but also Asunta's continuous sedation throughout the summer. The jury heard that the girl had been systematically poisoned by her parents, forcing her to suspend her activities and isolating her. The forensic experts explained that asphyxiation was the final act, committed when Asunta was incapacitated, proving the element of treachery, premeditation, alevosía. The second pillar came from the Guardia Civil, who presented the digital and geolocation evidence. The jury saw the security camera footage placing Rosario and Asunta heading to Teo, utterly destroying the mother's alibi. The online purchases of Lorazepam by Alfonso and the recovery of the photos of a sedated Asunta were presented, demonstrating that the journalist not only supplied the weapon but documented his daughter's suffering. This objective and immutable data contradicted every lie told by the accused. The third pillar focused on the lack of a clear motive, which led the prosecution to theorize a combination of reasons: Rosario's need to free herself from the burden of motherhood, or Asunta's demanding education, to resume a free personal and romantic life, and Alfonso's obsession with controlling his ex-wife, viewing Asunta as a logistical obstacle in the new family ecosystem. In contrast, the defense strategy of the accused was a disaster orchestrated by incoherence. Rosario Porto pleaded not guilty, claiming that Asunta's sedation had been Alfonso's doing and that she had only transported the body under coercion or in a state of shock induced by the situation. Her testimony was erratic, full of contradictions and moments of crying that the jury interpreted as an act. Alfonso Basterra, maintaining his intellectual aura, pleaded not guilty, denying supplying the drug and committing the crime. His defense focused on the idea that the truth could not be reconstructed with a clear motive, attempting to sow reasonable doubt. However, his inability to justify the Lorazepam purchases and his absolute coldness regarding his daughter's fate played strongly against him. The trial lasted over a month. The defenses of Alfonso and Rosario, instead of helping each other, mutually sank when they proved unable to explain the forensic and technological evidence. Their versions, full of evasions and veiled accusations, demonstrated to the jury that both were intimately familiar with the crime's details. Finally, on October 30, 2015, the popular jury retired to deliberate. After 4 days of intense debate, the verdict was unanimous and resounding: guilty of murder. The popular jury found the co-authorship of the crime proven, with the aggravating factors of kinship and treachery, committing the murder without risk to the perpetrator, by drugging the victim. The sentence handed down by the court was made public days later. Rosario Porto Ortega and Alfonso Basterra Camporro were sentenced to 18 years in prison for the crime of murder, with the concurrence of the aggravating factor of kinship. The conviction sealed the fate of the perfect parents. The truth, silenced by Lorazepam and hidden by cynicism, had emerged through the work of the Guardia Civil, the experts, and the conviction of the jury. The Asunta Basterra case concluded with a conviction that served as a social warning about the deepest betrayal, that of parents for Rosario Porto and Alfonso Basterra. The judicial process of the Asunta Basterra case came to an end. However, the social impact, the morbid fascination, and the fundamental unknowns of the plot persist, preventing us from speaking of a complete closure in the collective consciousness. The story of the girl from Santiago de Compostela was etched into memory as an archetype of parental betrayal, a reminder that evil can reside under the facade of respectability. The jury's verdict was a resounding victory for circumstantial evidence. The case demonstrated how, in the modern era, technology and forensic science have become the most reliable witnesses. Without an eyewitness to the asphyxiation, guilt was proven thanks to the fusion of 3 objective elements: toxicology, the constant and lethal Lorazepam, geolocation, Rosario's alibi contradicted by the video, and computer forensics, Alfonso's drug purchases and the deleted photos. Their own devices and chemical trails became the confession they never uttered. Nevertheless, the trial and sentencing left an incomplete truth: the actual and explicit motive for the crime and the details of the execution. The prosecution theorized that the murder was due to a complex mix of motives: Rosario's need to free herself from the burden of motherhood, or Asunta's intensive education, to resume a free personal and romantic life, and Alfonso's desire to exert toxic control over Rosario, eliminating the girl who was the nexus, but also the obstacle. Neither of the two confessed nor offered a clear explanation. The jury had to infer the motive from their actions, the premeditation of the poisoning and the coldness of the execution. Nor could it be established with certainty which of the two asphyxiated Asunta. The sentence ruled co-authorship, that both planned, sedated, and were present at the final act, acting in mutual agreement. This conclusion was an acknowledgement that while their moods blamed each other, their actions demonstrated a pact of blood. The silence about the material author was the final act of criminal complicity. After the conviction, the lives of the killers took separate paths. Alfonso Basterra was imprisoned in Terceiro Prison, A Coruña, maintaining an attitude of defiance and intellectualism. Over the years, his behavior in prison was characterized by self-imposed seclusion, dedicated to reading and writing, and an obstinate denial of the crime. Alfonso never showed remorse, maintaining that he was the victim of a conspiracy. Rosario Porto, meanwhile, became a media figure and a tragic figure in prison. Marked by guilt and the difficulties of her prison life, Rosario attempted suicide on several occasions. Her fathoms and deteriorating psychological state kept her name in the headlines. Finally, on November 18, 2020, Rosario Porto was found dead in her cell at Brieva Prison, Ávila, bringing a definitive and grim end to her own story, without ever having confessed the truth to her daughter or to justice. The legacy of Asunta Basterra, however, transcends the fate of her parents. The case opened a profound social debate about the institution of adoption, forcing a reflection on the idealization of parenthood and the darkness that can hide behind the doors of a seemingly perfect home. The image of Asunta, the bright and talented Chinese girl, became the symbol of childhood fragility in the face of betrayal from those who should have protected her above all else. Although the case is closed judicially, the story of Asunta, the Lorazepam purchased online, the lie captured by security camera, and the final silence of two conspirators, will remain one of the darkest and most studied chapters of Spanish criminology, a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest mystery is not who but why. The memory of Asunta, the victim of this incomprehensible coldness, is the only thing that prevails.
If you liked this video, subscribe to the channel, activate the little bell, and give it a like. This way, you will help more people discover the story behind every mystery.
We have concluded the chilling chronicle of the Asunta Basterra case, a tale of betrayal and cynicism that demonstrated how evil can use the facade of the perfect family to execute the most heinous crime. The truth sealed with Lorazepam and hidden with digital lies, emerged to sentence two parents who turned their love into a pact of death. But the history of human evil takes many forms, and our next stop takes us from the cold-controlled conspiracy of Galicia to the burning, cold-driven madness of California. Prepare to delve into the mind of a man who believed himself a musical and spiritual prophet, and who unleashed an orgy of terror in the summer of love. We are talking about Charles Manson and the infamous family. We will travel back to 1969, to the Hollywood of the stars, to understand how music, drugs, and extreme manipulation led to the massacre that ended a generation's innocence. Don't miss the next installment, where we will analyze the life and legacy of the Manson family, the Sharon Tate murders, and the terrifying concept of helter-skelter. Subscribe and turn on notifications so that the madness of Manson doesn't catch you off guard.